Thank you for tuning in for today's episode. I'm your host, Naimur. In this episode, we will be talking about the ways in which modern politics can use laws to undermine democracy. Strangling democracy through law, competitive authoritarianism in Bangladesh in the regime between 2009 and 2024. This explains how there are paradoxically functioning democratic institutions, but they are devoid of any real meaning. To help us explain this paradox, I will be speaking with Muhammad Obaidullah Ahrar. Obaidullah, can you hear me? The floor is yours.
Yes, Naimur, I can hear you. Thank you for inviting me. When we mention the concept of democracy, what most of us will have in mind is elections, people queuing up to cast their votes, ballot boxes, and victorious candidates. But that is not all democracy is about. Democracy is fundamentally about real power struggles. It has to do with whether it is possible to challenge the leaders if there may be genuine competition and whether the rules of the game apply to everyone. We have long been led to think that democracy failed disastrously either by military coups, suspended constitutions, or tanks on the streets. However, in the modern world, democracy tends to be killed in a much more different manner. As Stephen Levitsky and Daniel Ziblatt argued, democracies may die at the hands not of generals but of elected leaders, presidents, or prime ministers who subvert the very process that brought them into power. Democracy is not something that is shunned by elected leaders, rather, they undermine it internally while claiming they are protecting it. This leads to the concept of competitive authoritarianism. Levitsky and Way applied this term to political regimes that are neither democratic nor dictatorial. They argue that in competitive authoritarian regimes, formal democratic institutions are widely viewed as the principal means of obtaining and exercising political authority. Incumbents violate these rules so often and to such an extent, however, that the regime fails to meet conventional minimum standards for democracy. Democratic institutions are present in such systems. Elections are held, legislatures meet, courts function, the media operates. Outwardly, all things appear democratic, but in reality, it is different. Democracy is not prohibited, but there is extreme unfair competition. Those in power manipulate the laws, institutions, and the state resources to level the playing field to their advantage. The opposition is not prohibited but is heavily limited. Democracy is merely surviving in the form but not in substance. So, the question for today's discussion is not whether democracy disappears but how it is being suffocated gradually through the law and the institutions. In our later discussions, we shall discuss how this process is played out across various democratic institutions.
Thank you, Obaidullah. We may now turn to the most obvious arena of any democracy, the ballot box. In order to talk about how the electoral process has evolved, we have Muhammad Naim Rahman. Naim, what did the electoral situation change in this time?
Thank you for giving me the floor. Ardent argues that when popular sovereignty is reduced to election alone without sustained public participation, democratic legitimacy becomes fragile, a condition that helps explain the limitation of competitive democracy. Let's see an example. Sheikh Hasina implemented a perfect plan to strangle the democratic state system, which she started by abolishing the caretaker government. This led to the subsequent parliamentary election being held under party government. The people saw an example of how election can be when the election commissioner spoke out about his helplessness in Nangon City Corporation election back to 2012. In the 2008 national elections, the Awami League and Grand Alliance, known as Mohadut, secured an absolute majority of seats, winning 230 out of 300 seats and influencing the parliamentary composition in their favor. Then, in 2013, when the 5th May Hifazat Islam called for a rally at Shapla Chattor, she gave a message about how the next election would be administratively by indiscriminate killing madrasa students. According to BBC News, clashes over protests in Bangladesh resulted in at least 27 deaths and involved security forces firing on demonstrators, including students from madrasas. They all were children. Then came the rigid election of 2014, where 153 candidates were elected unopposed. When the independence of the judiciary was taken away through the implementation of 16th Amendment of the Constitution, through rigid parliament, the judiciary and the executive came to face position through various dramas. The Chief Justice Surendra Kumar Sinha, known as S.K. Sinha, was forced to resign and leave the country. The final form of turning this country into a dictatorship was the rigid election of 2018, where the Awami League gained an absolute majority through night voting. At the root of all their misdeeds was a rigid, weak election system. This weak election system helped constitutionally legitimize all their misdeeds. All these injustices were abolished through the mass uprising on 36th July 2014. That was for my end. Thank you.
Thank you for your thoughtful views and informations. It is obvious that the elections are not the only part of the puzzle. After gaining the power, power is in many cases centralized in the chambers of the parliament. The laws are enacted which may defend the people or defend the state. Bushra Khan is one that has been targeting the legislature. How did the parliament work as an instrument of this competitive authoritarian? Bushra, can you hear me? Bushra, you are mute. You are muted.
Sorry. Thank you, Naimur. Levitsky and Way argue that competitive authoritarianism system do not destroy such democratic institution as a legislature. Rather, this institution still persists. The political context within them becomes grossly uneven. The legislature is formally democratic, yet the executive takes over it by gradually controlling it via a legal and procedural moves. Parliaments continue to discuss, opposition parties still exist, and law is pressed. But as Levitsky and Way are keen to point out, their presentation of the legislative, the actors may compete, albeit under heavily unfair conditions that favor those in power. This makes the legislature an enclosed arena and not a real check of the executive authority. Some of the strategies employed by the executive includes limiting parliamentary debates, rushing through legislation, carteling practitioners and participation, and enactment of law which criminalize dissent. These are carried out over time and erode the norms of parliamentary practice and turn the legislature into a executive instrument. An excellent illustration of this is Bangladesh. In Bangladesh, the ruling party controls the legislature despite the fact that it has a working parliament and frequent elections. Misuse of laws like a Digital Security Act of 2018 through parliamentary laws have been employed in mitigating the dissent and voice opposition. This is precisely what Levitsky and Way refers to the use of democratical institution to justify authoritarian practices. In conclusion, competitive authoritarian regimes do not destroy legislatures, rather they, as demonstrate in the reading, hollow them out, maintaining the democratic form but destroying the democratic substance. Thank you.
Thank you, Bushra. The judiciary is expected to be the ultimate defense of the citizen in case a law is enacted by the legislature. But in our study, we find that even legal institutions may be employed to control. I will briefly play the role of my research to address the question on how the judiciary was accessed and used between 2009 and 24. The concept which we are analyzing is competitive authoritarianism. This is a regime where a country seems to be a democracy because they hold elections, but the incumbent goes against democratic regulations too frequently. Another major field of conflict within such regimes is the judiciary. Judges are expected to play a neutral role in a healthy democracy. Modern dictators stay in power by filling the courts with their own supporters and attacks on democracy. One of these was the case of Chief Justice S. Kasina in 2017 in Bangladesh, when he reached a legal conclusion that was not in the favor of the government. He was pressured to step down and forced to leave the country. Authoritarian leaders can be able to remain in power by dismissing maverick judges and replacing them with their supporters. When the independence of the judiciary is lost, the regime applies the concept of legal harassment as a means of challenging and silencing its opponents. This happened on many occasions in Bangladesh during the previous fascist regime. For example, the hundreds of court proceedings against Nobel laureate Dr. Muhammad Yunus and the former Prime Minister Begum Khaleda Zia, and thousands of opposition leaders who were in fact arrested directly before the elections. The regime also set an unequal playing field whereby it used the courts to either arrest its opponents or disqualify them to run the election. Contemporary dictators do not eliminate the law. They instead deploy it as an instrument of undermining democratic institutions under the shade of legality. The courts meant to protect the rights of the people, but it became a tool of ensuring that the regime remained in authority under the shade of being a democracy. This is how many democracies are being killed today, not by a military takeover, but by an electoral highway to demolish the democracy. Thank you. And lastly, democracy is dependent on the flow of information. To have such a system which is competitive, there must be the opposition and the voice of the people, right? But what occurs when such a voice is censored or suppressed by digital protection measures and change of ownership? Finally, to conclude our discussion, Rafia Afrida comes to discussion and she will discuss the media state. Rafia, Rafia, how did freedom of the press appear at this period? Rafia.
Thank you, Naimur, for giving me the floor to speak. So, the media is the early warning system of a democracy. Since it highlights potential problems in democracy before it collapses, and independent press provides voters in democracy with the knowledge they need to make intelligent political decisions when it checks the person or persons in power for abuse and allows the opposition to have a hearing. Freedom of press can secure democracy's accountability. This can be seen in this investigative press that uncovered the US Watergate scandal. However, the media may at times be seized instead of destroyed within competing authoritarian regimes. According to the Levitskian way, governments utilize the legal systems to control the media, judiciary, and election systems with the aim of remaining in the power while simultaneously creating a facade of democracy. The media is dominated by pro government discourse and may struggle to survive considering the pressure and legal proceedings brought against them. According to Levitsky and Ziblatt, democracy may quietly unravel instead of being overthrown violently. There are instances where media may lack independence, as evidenced by empirical research from Freedom House, which highlights the decline of a free media within various countries like Bangladesh, where journalists were influenced by political, economic, and legal pressures to induce self censorship among them. It becomes difficult for citizens to distinguish between information and the truth within a state where media lacks independence and results in decline of democracy within the country. Thank you.
We are now at the end of the discussion today. That then concludes our analysis. Nowadays, we have seen how in Bangladesh democracy was not destroyed by force between 2009 and 24, but by law. The element of competition in our politics had been throttled gradually through the manipulation of elections and the legislature, the separation of the judicial system and media. Knowing this history, we acquire the means to be able to identify and oppose these trends in the future. I would like to thank Ubaidullah, Naim, Bushra, and Rafia who were able to offer some expert advice. Thank you everyone for being with us. Thank you.